Students as co-directors, student-led learning, and the performing ensemble. Many choir directors choose to enter the profession due to an influential director from their past, often bringing those teaching techniques into their own classroom, more than likely the model where the director stands as the sole musical provider. And then they feed their music directly to the ensemble, not leaving room for students to have the opportunity for creativity, musical choice, or extended learning. This means that students performing in the ensemble are not as involved in the music learning and music making process as assumed. Directors typically share a philosophy of wanting to create lifelong musicians, yet there's a gap in how much of the music making students do in the traditional performing ensemble beyond playing notes, the notes in front of them, in the exact way that their conductor tells them to. It is our responsibility as teacher conductors to involve our student musicians into more of the music making process and the basis of this proposed study. The purpose of this study is to investigate how involving students in the music learning and music making process improves music literacy, musical independence, and a sense of ownership in the ensemble for students. My research question is, what impact does student-led learning, or students teaching students, have on musical autonomy in a performing ensemble? The importance of this study is that for decades, the performing ensemble has only been directed one way, by the teacher on the podium and often only by rote, with little to no music literacy work or help for the students. This can create disengaged students who do not feel like they know what they're doing, as well as a routine that puts both teacher and student in a learning and musical rut. The solution to this problem is to get students involved in their own music learning process, thereby enriching the curriculum and developing content knowledge. This study will show the individual and group benefits of a more hands-on approach to learning music for performance. The concept of adding elements of student-led learning into the performing ensemble is relatively new, with the bulk of the research happening within the last decade. There are benefits to the traditional director-led learning model, especially when used as a complementary structure in the performing ensemble rehearsal, but when used exclusively, there are a myriad of negative impacts on students that can occur. Students can quickly and without detection fall behind in their musical literacy, be unable to learn or follow music independently, and lose their feeling of connection to their ensemble, causing negative student experiences, loss of motivation, and problems with retention. The surrounding research on STS and what I will outline in the literature review typically focuses on one of these three main benefits: music literacy, musical independence, and a sense of ownership in their group. There's not much research, however, on the benefits of student centered learning of all three of these components, which, for the sake of this research, will be called musical autonomy. Gilbert 2016 calls out that the traditional director instruction only based ensemble creates musicians who cannot learn, practice, and perform music independently. While they could perform a concert of pleasant sounding music, there's a high chance that only students with high musical aptitude, outside experience with music literacy, such as in their home or with private lessons, or those who intentionally spend time on their own will learn the literacy behind the music. As Widener 2020 explores, it is quite likely in this model that the directors will dictate every note and articulation with no interest in whether or not students know how to read the score and perform the correct musical action based on their own reading and musical literacy. That study by Widener also saw that in classrooms that include student-led learning and responsibility with foundation music literacy, even when mistakes were made and recorrected, student music literacy and agency increased overall. Jordan 2022 decided to equip his high school a cappella choir with the tools to make real-time musical edits to formally notated music, and were also exposed to projects where they created the music notation themselves, which directly relates to Kastner and Menin's research in 2019, who speak on the fact that popular music, a favorite among students, often uses legitimate notation techniques such as lead sheets and tablature, which further expand student music literacy beyond the traditional Western standard music notation. Musical independence is an overarching term that includes the ability to learn music with little to no director guidance, ability to perform music in time with the ensemble, and the tools and skills needed to experience music in some way throughout their lifetime. Gazetta's 2020 action research shows that students not only found it easy to be taught music by their peers, but felt that they accomplished their musical goals learning from their peers, leading to additional confidence in their own musical independence. Music independence does look different at different ages and different levels of musical experience, which Gazetta's research supports. Activity type can also be a factor in which activities are most beneficial when completed in a student-led setting. This also contributes to what Pendergast 2021 calls relatedness, which is a set of systems by students for students that clearly develops student musical independence while simultaneously completing these social activities. Tucker 2020 noted that the students who saw the music learning process as exciting were more likely to practice independently, seek out additional learning on their instrument, and generally grow independently as a musician. Hanrahan et al. 2019 sought to prove that the technology itself led to improved student experience in a performing ensemble, but it also showed that it assisted students in their ability to focus on more difficult parts of the music making process, allowing them to gain confidence in their musical independence more quickly in the early stages of musical development. Technology integration in the classroom has also been linked to student motivation. Consequently, musical independence can also be linked to student motivation. As outlined in Butler's research 2022, when student musical competence increases, so does student intrinsic motivation. The first thing to look at when discussing ensemble ownership is that student motivation. Extrinsic motivation, such as chair placements and other extremely public shows of student ability, are often the key motivators used in performing ensemble classes, as Tucker 2020 outlines. This disengages and discourages many students from having a desire to further develop their instrument musicality and even continue in music. When intrinsic motivation is nurtured instead, Tucker 2020 notes not only the renewed student enthusiasm, but the overall improvement in all facets of their ensemble, including the ensemble atmosphere and performances themselves. While ensemble ownership focuses primarily on students, Butler 2020 contends that teacher satisfaction plays a role in this as well. When an ensemble director can include STS in a rehearsal, there's more student playing time. The ensemble works at peak efficiency, director contentment increases, and students are motivated to continue rehearsing and performing at that high level. Pendergast 2021 states that students' perception of their ability to add value to the group adds to their intrinsic motivation, as well as the joy students get from playing in a performing ensemble. The first month of this study would be a baseline for data collection. The second month would be to teach students the skills they need to support the study. The third and fourth months would be to gather data and allow for full analysis of the study following multiple informal and formal performances. This proposal is based in a school setting in rural central Iowa town with a population of about 11,500 people. The school, according to the Iowa Department of Education, is primarily white. The majority of remaining students are reported as multiracial, Hispanic, Black, African American, and Asian. The student population is 51.5% male, 48.5% female, with 0% of students reported as non-binary. Of these students, about 40% are considered low socioeconomic status, receiving free and reduced lunch. And there are two major socioeconomic groups, low and high, with very few families being considered middle class. And 13% of students in the district have an individual education plan. The study will be completed using multiple case study research with participants in 3 different choirs for comparison. These choirs include an auditioned SATB 4-part mixed choir, an unauditioned SATB 4-part mixed choir, and a non-auditioned SSA 3-part treble choir. Students will be 14 to 18 years of age in grades 9 through 12 and primarily white, multiracial, Hispanic, and Black African American. The auditioned SATB mixed choir will have an equal number of male and female participants. However, the 2 non-audition choirs will be composed of a majority female members. In total, there will be approximately 80 student participants. My experiences, passion, and strong philosophy may influence many aspects of this research throughout the entire study. However, I am committed to conducting the most unbiased research possible throughout the planning, data collection, interpretation of results, and integration of what was learned into my everyday practice in order to best benefit the students in my choirs. My research will follow a mixed method approach, with the qualitative method being the main driving force of my action research, with a quantitative approach being nested within. I will be using multiple case study research, as aforementioned, looking at 3 specific choirs for comparison. Embedded within this multiple case study, I will also be implementing correlational research with all 3 choirs. 2 formal assessments at the beginning and end of the study, along with 2 informal assessments in between, will track the musical literacy of students, looking specifically at pitch, rhythm, and articulation in order to gauge the correlation and its strength in music literacy with implementation of student-led learning. Data collection for this study will commence immediately, starting with the interview of the 5 student focus group, utilizing a round-robin style interview on the next slide. I will strive to create a group of students with a diversified musical background. This group will be composed of selected and volunteer students, all of whom will give consent prior to the study. These same questions will be asked again of the focus group at the end of the formal study period. In a similar manner, all consenting students will have the opportunity to take the Musical Independence Quick Check survey via a Google form. This survey will be given as a 4-point Likert scale in order to gain an unskewed view on the improvement or regression in musical literacy throughout the study. This survey will be given 3 times, spaced equally throughout the study. A variety of artifacts will be collected in this study, including the aforementioned formal pre- and post-study music literacy with rhythm portion assessment. Other artifacts that will be collected include, but are not limited to, video evidence of student-led learning and activities, rhythm checks of learned repertoire, and a running teacher reflection journal. Throughout the 4-month period, observation data will be collected by myself, 2 other music teachers in my district, and our school's instructional coach. Observations that will be taken include percentage of time teacher versus student is leading the learning, activity type, its leader and effectiveness, and student confidence and ownership in work and performance. Here are our student focus group questions. Feel free to pause to check them out, as well as our musical independence quick check survey. While the data collected within this study is quite varied, the analysis of the data is fairly straightforward. All quantitative data is coded within their respective tracking sheets to the same 4 categories outlined here. Some of the qualitative data is automatically coded to these 4 categories as well. For consistency, all qualitative data artifacts, observations, reflections, etc., will be coded collectively by the 4 involved observers to one of these categories. Color coding the qualitative data will allow for a quick analysis of each of the respective activities and points of study. From this, conclusions can be made about the effectiveness of each studied point in the end goal of musical autonomy, therefore informing how each activity is done in the future, specifically teacher-led versus student-led. In addition, patterns will emerge about student-led learning and its impact within the ensemble, both during the typical daily rehearsal and the end-of-unit performance or concert. From these conclusions, the Council of Teachers working on this research project will create a concept map outlining themes, subthemes, and connections between patterns of findings. Not only will individual students benefit from this study, but the performing ensemble will benefit as a whole. Students who struggle with music literacy will receive even more differentiated instruction when their peers take the lead. Those who are more advanced in their performing art will have the opportunity to extend their learning by teaching through their peers. Students who may be shy in front of the whole group will have an opportunity to work with a smaller group, affording them the chance to ask questions and have an easier time learning the music in that smaller group setting. The entire ensemble will have ownership over the group, bringing an additional sense of pride to their learning and performing, enhancing both the student experience and student learning. The biggest limitation with this particular study is the lack of a formal control group. While the first month of the study it could be considered a control, it does not account for natural growth in musical autonomy that would happen over time in the instructor-led only model. In the future, having access to a similar choir to use as a control would improve on this research. As a result of this study, it would be my hope that more ensemble directors implement student-led learning into their daily ensemble rehearsal, including allowing students to make some of the musical decisions themselves in class and for formal and informal performances. Keeping the collective desire to create lifelong musicians in some capacity in mind, relinquishing a percentage of musical control as appropriate based on the setting should be something that directors and students alike look forward to within their ensemble. Finally, the skills students acquire through student-led learning in a performing ensemble can easily be transferred to other learning opportunities in their educational journeys and eventually to their workplaces, all while hopefully taking part in music in some capacity along the way.